What's up guys, loads of football talk here, back on YouTube with a slightly different video. We've done a lot of all 22 breakdowns recently, looking at specific players and teams. Today it's going to be much simpler and more of a podcast format, as I take you into the process of filling out my Pro Bowl ballot, going through every single position and offering a couple of words of analysis, maybe a stat or two. You can listen to this whilst you're in the car, getting some work done, or also parallel to posting your own votes. That's up to you. Feel free to let me know where you disagree afterwards, but for now I'll just share my thoughts based on having watched these guys on tape all season long. Let's not lose any further time and start with the quarterbacks, of course. First up, Josh Allen of the Bills, the overwhelming favorite for MVP right now, legitimately looking like Superman out there with the insane throws out of structure and backbreaking scrambles, but also more than willing to pepper his running backs in advantageous matchups if that's what's needed. Leads the NFL with a massive .34 AP per play and just got 90 points over the last 2 weeks combined. Then you have Lamar Jackson in the tier at the top of Josh, actually more so getting it done with big time throws from the pocket, where he's taking another major step in diagnosing defensive looks and having answers when the picture changes post snap, along with still being the most dangerous runner at the position probably. 37 total touchdowns compared to only 3 interceptions, which all came off the hands of his receivers. Next up I'm going to go with Jared Goff of the Lions. Just became the first guy with over 400 passing yards, 5 touchdowns and no picks to lose a game, speaking to how he's been called upon more to keep pacing games where their depleted defense has been more and more vulnerable, and they haven't been able to rely on the run game as much. So many big time throws from the pocket, work in the middle of the field, and trusting offensive coordinator Ben Johnson that the windows will be there. Then Joe Burrow, an absolute robot against zone coverage, along with having the weaponry receiver to exploit matchups in man. That Cincy defense has been an abomination, and Joe's had to keep them in games with his right arm, currently on pace for the league's triple crown for passes, so to speak, with 361 completions for just under 4,000 yards and 36 touchdowns. Then I'm going to scroll down a little bit here and go with Justin Herbert for the Chargers, who's also been asked to take more on his plate as the run game has really come to a halt there. Nearly 3,000 yards through the air, 90 total touchdowns, compared to only 2 picks, with rookie wide receiver Lev McConkey being by far his most trustworthy skill position player, and all are provided by the passing game conceptually. Has had a couple of big rushing days, including an incredible showcase in a Monday night win over the surging Bengals. And then I'll go back with Matt Stafford here as the last guy. Has continued to battle despite injuries to his top 2 receivers at times, constant reshuffling on the offensive line, his defense really struggling when the front hasn't been able to affect games, and him himself haven't been banged up at times. You do see him force balls into tight windows and play with some fire to some degree, but you want to see that trick shots artists go to work, and the Rams have now won 7 of the last 9 games to tie for the NFC West lead. A couple of honorable mentions here. Jaden Daniels, the favorite for Offensive Rookie of the Year, has been much better work in the middle of the field than anticipated, and been so tough to stop when he's taking off on key downs. Let's see how he handles these final 3 games and can lead the Commanders to a playoff spot, as opponents are starting to figure out how to slow down this fast-paced attack. And Baker Mayfield, complete gunslinger, who has played with that swagger again that we saw early during his time in Cleveland. They throw a lot of screens and dump-offs in Tampa, but when you see him rip seam routes or throw the ball from Mike Evans, it's really fun. Next up we've got running backs, and there's a couple of simple ones that we can go right away. Saquon Barkley, Derrick Henry, the top 2 favorites for Offensive Player of the Year. Saquon, of course, leads the league in scrimmage yards, needing just 36 more to hit the 2,000 mark, along with 13 total touchdowns. Philly has certainly leaned on him to carry the load, whilst they've had to iron out some issues through the air, but the efficiency at working runs conceptually, and the theatrical aspects along with it, to spin off defenders or hurdle with them backwards, are absolutely there. And then Derrick Henry, just over 200 rushing yards behind Saquon, but has over 300 more than the next closest guy, along with a league-leading 15 touchdowns. Very different in terms of an individual producer of yardage, where he can make people miss in a phone booth. Maybe not quite that guy, but you see the compounding effect his style has on defenses, where they get tired of tackling him and he drags them along later in games. Bijan Robinson, the third guy to just crack the 1,500 yard mark from scrimmage, extremely involved in the passing games, a lot of times simply as an outlet and on screens, although we have seen him beat guys one-on-one when allowed to go vertical, has the speed to win the corner on those outside zone calls for Atlanta, but can stick his foot on the ground and go north in a hurry, and then he's really good at slicing from multiple points of contact for nice gains. Jahmyr Gibbs for the Detroit Lions, probably has the most use of any of these guys, already with a touchdown run of 70 and a touchdown reception of over 50 yards to his name. So much better at finding lanes between the tackles than you anticipate, and then he can outrace just about any scraping linebacker from the backside. Just one touchdown behind the high mark for the league right now. James Cook of the Bills is right there tied with Gibbs at 14 TDs. Another guy who just comes in a smaller package but runs so hard, and as the Bills have fully transitioned to more of a gap scheme heavy approach, his ability to alter pace, set up his blockers, and make them work ultimately has continued to improve, along with basically fully eliminating drops and fumbles. And then the last spot, that was a tougher one, but I'm going to go with James Conner up here, who still leads the league with 61 missed tackles forced as a runner, and nearly 3.5 of his 4.5 yards per carry coming after contact. Much more of a power back, but still really good at approaching different concepts with the appropriate amount of urgency versus patience required. By far the most reliable component of this Cardinals offense, along with the tight end, which they have been at their best when it's run through him. Quite a few honorable mentions: Alvin Kamara, who somehow ranks 4th, just shy of 1,500 scrimmage yards, as part of an otherwise lost Saints season. Josh Jacobs, one short of that crown for most missed tackles forced, for one of the league's top rushing attacks in Green Bay. Tony Pollard quietly having a massive bounce back year for Tennessee, with way too much volatility around him unfortunately. Devon Achane, not nearly as many breakaway runs or even efficiency on the ground in Miami this year, but this guy is still massively involved as a pass catcher. Chuba Hubbard, sneaky great year as a do-it-all back for Carolina, playing a massive 77% of offensive snaps and being effective with his touches. And then J.K. Dobbins, I don't want his season to get lost because he got hurt, since he had 900 yards and 8 touchdowns on well under 200 opportunities for the Chargers before getting hurt, which has us moving on to the wide receiver position, where there's also a lot of names that deserve recognition, but we'll start at the top here with Jamar Chase and Justin Jefferson. Chase being on pace for the NFL's receiving crown, and they've needed every one of those plays to even be a lifestyle for the AFC playoffs, with how little resistance that Bengals defense has shown. Just an absolute game breaker who can take a slant route to the house or flat out run by his man on any given play. Jefferson, an elite all-around player at the position, who can win as a route runner from any alignment, beat bracket coverage, play strong at the catch point, create yards with the ball in his hands. He's faced some insane coverages to just slow him down, and that's when the rest of that crew has really feasted, as the Vikings rank 6th in net yards every time they drop back. CeeDee Lamb's the next one up here, still having another great year as part of a Cowboys team that has looked lost for the first half of the season, before re-emerging to some degree with the backup quarterback in the lineup recently. Thanks to contributions of CD, Rico Dowdle at running back, and the defense. He ranks behind only that LSU duo in terms of receiving yards individually, and Amon-Ra St. Brown is actually 4th here, along with being 2nd in catches, a monster over the middle of the field who can absorb hits, and his blind faith from Jared Goff that he'll convert on crucial downs for him, on top of scoring double-digit times again already, including a 66-yarder to keep them in play versus the Bills this past Sunday. Plus, we have 2 more guys who have missed time but been incredible when available, and I have to scroll down a little bit here to find Puka Nacua and Nico Collins. Let's start with Nico, basically the only pass catcher who has really gotten the job done for the Texans this year, where he's that big-bodied vertical threat, a catch-and-run specialist, and a chain mover out of timing, all in one guy for that group. Tied for a PFF best grade of 92 among wideouts, with Puka actually, who is also number 1, nearly a half yard ahead of everybody else, with 3.5 yards per route run. We've seen the highlight reel catches through contact or toe tapping at the sideline, but it's the consistency at which he turns simple throws into first downs, and what he provides as an insert blocker primarily in the run game that makes him one of a kind. Several other guys I just want to quickly bring up here. Jerry Jeudy, as I scroll back up, one of only 5 guys to already crack the 1,000-yard mark through the air, has really turned around his career in a role more suited for him in Cleveland, but also playing with a completely different level of confidence. Both the Jets guys, Garrett Wilson is a yak specialist, and Devontae Adams is someone who Aaron Rodgers can just throw the ball up to, now that their chemistry has really come back. A.J. Brown finally getting fed for the Eagles because he's been winning a lot vertically and on those quick slant routes where he's almost the best guy in the league. There was some frustration that came out last week with these comments that were out there, even though it was overblown. But we've seen when you do throw the ball to him and you make it a priority to get him involved, what that can pay off as. George Pickens for the Steelers, an aerial acrobat supreme, who has also become much better at winning quickly on slants and stuff like that. Terry McLaurin, really the only wide receiver with great production for highly effective Washington attack. And then the 2 rookies, Brian Thomas Jr. for the Jags, size speed freak with tremendous flexibility for his build, who has continued to demand a higher target share, and Malik Neighbors for the Giants, who's been peppered with throws all season long, but it's largely in the mold of please make a play for us, because nobody else really can, and that may not be a recipe for success, even if it has worked in spots. Then we're going to do the fullbacks, which are actually the next position here. Absolutely insane that we still pick the same amount of these guys as we do wide receivers, but let's show some love to the position. Of course, Kyle Juszczyk, the number one Swiss Army knife, who can line up anywhere on the field and be an asset for the Niners. Hunter Lipke, very involved as a passing down back for Dallas, with 9 first downs and 20 touches, and a dog on special teams. Alec Ingold for the Dolphins, often attached to Miami's O-line as an H-back more so, who they bring across the formation as a blocker, or uses the flat element on the RPOs and quick game stuff. CJ Ham, been doing it for a long time in Minnesota, and they've been the most productive out of 2-back sets, I believe anyway. Scott Matlock, a convert defensive tackle for the Chargers, who has been smashing into bodies and allowed his team to convert in a lot of third and shorts or at the goal line. And finally Patrick Hart, similar path, a near 300-pounder, who can iso block for Derrick Henry, but also sneak out of 7-man protections and punish the defense for losing him occasionally. Now moving on to the tight ends, where there's a lot more to discuss as we scroll back up to the top here. George Kittle for the Niners, still the best two-way tight end in the game, who can drive block a defensive end on the front side of run calls, but also stride away from safeties on deep over routes, averaging 14.5 yards per catch and having scored 8 touchdowns already. That's the only thing that has sort of held back Trey McBride for us division foe in the Arizona Cardinals, as his 2 touchdowns came jumping on a loose fumble and once running it in on a jet sweep. Absolute target monster who does a lot of damage after the catch, whether it's running away from guys, going through them, or leaping over them. And the only guy ahead of him is Brock Bowers in terms of receiving yards, who is about to smash the rookie record for the position, already at 968, which is 8th among all players, including wide receivers. Can win on the seams, beat cornerbacks isolated on the backside, great body control, and will eat up yardage with the ball in his hands in a hurry. Then we've got Jonnu Smith for the Dolphins, a true yak specialist, who Miami has really added an element with on his slide routes and drags, because of what he can do if you feed him, 4th in both yards and touchdowns for the position, including the game win in overtime against the Jets a couple weeks ago. Tucker Kraft in the second row for the Packers. I'd say they get the job done in very different ways, but Kraft is the outlet receiver in a lot of the concepts, along with designing the screens inside for him. At like 255 pounds, his strides, the way he uses off arm to fend off people, but then he can also go through them when needed, is tremendous. He leads all tight ends with 13 missed tackles forced with the ball in his hands. And then I'll give some credit to Cade Otton, a highly underrated do-it-all guy for Tampa Bay, who have really needed him to step up in the absence of Chris Godwin, already has 600 receiving yards, and quietly is behind only Kraft with 1 fewer missed tackle forced on the year. Honorable mentions, Travis Kelce, you can get him in every year, but has definitely slowed down for a Chiefs passing game that has had its tough stretches, but still impeccable finding space and working a scramble drill. Hunter Henry for the Patriots, very dependable for rookie quarterback Drake May, runs one of the best sail routes and uses his height to his advantage regularly. And Mark Andrews, quietly coming along after he was barely involved early on, again showing up down the seams and scoring 8 touchdowns already. That brings us to the big guys up front. First with the offensive tackles. No idea what these guys are listed by, but I'm going to start here with Penei Sewell, who is a couple rows down, I believe. The most complete tackle in the game right now, I'd argue, in terms of winning as a technician and being a wall and protection, along with all the different ways you can weaponize him in the run game. No sex allowed until now, and I just love to see him get out in front of plays and absolutely blast people. Lane Johnson for the Eagles, if we can actually find him here. Just allowed his first sack in about a calendar year to TJ Watt. Pro Football Focus actually didn't charge him with it because Jalen Hurts escaped the other way, but I'll count it here. Yet only 8 out of total pressures and one of his best seasons as a run blocker this year. Tristan Wirth, the name next to him, freak athlete who just showed that off this past weekend when he kind of single-handedly took care of a twist that charges through Adam. Just 9 total pressures to his name and a road grader for the Bucs gap heavy rushing attack. Trent Williams, we have to search here again a little bit to find this 49ers logo, still getting it done at a high level despite of how long he's been hanging around and some of the personal tragedy he's gone through, which is something that people sometimes forget with these perfect athletes that you see on Sundays. In terms of when actually on the field, PFF grades him well above 80 in both the run and pass game. Bringing us to Zach Tom of the Packers. not getting the recognition he deserves on the right side of the Green Bay O-line, as another very complete guy who actually ranks ahead of the two guys that I just discussed in overall grades. And finally, Garrett Bowles for the Broncos, the best guy along the Stenger front five, which has kept the rookie quarterback clean for the most part and been at least average in the run game. He does get flagged quite a bit, but only one sack allowed so far on over 500 pass blocking snaps. 4 more honorable mentions. You can of course talk about Jordan Mailata on the left side of the Eagles O-line, highest graded tackle on PFF's database, although he missed a month, but you can absolutely make a case for him. Dion Dawkins for the Bills, been on a heater just like his quarterback over the last 2 weeks, taking the lunch money of the likely defensive rookie of the year, and the Rams are adverse. Ryan O'Neal, a stalwart on the right side for the Vikings, as they've not had a turnstile across from him, but have been really effective on offense otherwise. And both Chargers tackles at least deserve consideration, Rashawn Slater and Joe Alt, keeping the edge of Justin Herbert clean. Now moving one spot inside to the guards, we start off with Chris Lindstrom of the Falcons. If I can actually find him here. PFF's highest ranked guard this year among guys with 300 plus snaps, has been one of the game's best for several years now, excelling in the way he executes different techniques and zone concepts, and makes interior rushers have to work. Sam Cosmi of the Washington Commanders, not somebody who many people expected to talk about in this sense this year, made a massive jump and has been a huge asset of Washington's very ground game, because he can scoop blocks, execute long pulls, get out in space on screen plays, along with only having surrendered 1 sack all year. Then Kevin Zeitler for the Detroit Lions. Right behind Lindstrom in terms of PFF grade at the position, just 60 total pressures on nearly 500 snaps in pass protection, and there are basically no missed assignments in the run game for a high-powered Lions attack. Quinn Miners of the Broncos, if I can actually find him here. A guy who just throws people out of the club, being relentless with driving his legs to finish blocks, can wrap around and blast linebackers at the hole, but also just 9 total pressures on nearly 100 more snaps in protection and Zeitler, as I just talked about. And then the Chiefs duo of Joe Thuney, who has no sacks allowed yet, and just 1 penalty called against all year long, even though he's never been a rogue grader in the run game necessarily. And Trey Smith on the other side, who absolutely is that ass kicker, who just wants to take the soul of edge defenders on kickouts, or will take joy in putting people on the ground when he catches them off balance, but also not having been responsible for a sack yet. Some honorable mentions in this category: Landon Dickerson of the Eagles, and you could probably add Mekhi Becton resurrecting his career on the opposite side of him, for how well everybody in the field O-line has performed. Tyler Smith has been a bright spot for an otherwise declining Cowboys front, with Father Time finally catching up to Zach Martin, who has since been put on IR. Quentin Nelson for the Colts, penalty and pressure numbers are definitely too high, but watching in some big time matchups in his higher place as a move blocker deserve recognition at least. And Robert Hunt coming over from Miami to Carolina, really firming up the interior part of the pass protection and being a ball in the run game. Which brings us finally now to the center position, where we'll stick with the Chiefs and Creed Humphrey, completing that interior trio for Kansas City, which has been the best in the league for like the last 3 years. His overall PFF grade of 93.0 is more than 10 points higher than any other center so far with 100 plus snaps, been a top 10 technician that they stepped onto an NFL field, and one of the most crucial pieces in them being in Super Bowl contention every year. Then we've got Frank Ragnar of the Detroit Lions once again. The next gap, if you go by PFF's database, plays with a level of grit and savviness that is second to none. His pressure numbers are higher than you'd like to see, but he's just so good in the run and screen game, along with not having allowed any free rushes up those A-gaps. Tyler Linderbaum from the Ravens is the main challenge of one of those 2 All-Pro spots. He's allowed Baltimore to diversify the run game, and the stability he's provided as they figured out the rest of the front 5 has been huge. Individually, he hasn't allowed a sack yet either. Aaron Brewer for the Dolphins is someone who isn't talked about enough, and that's why I talked about him actually in my Under the Radar stud video a couple of weeks ago. You can watch that right after this one. Has rare movement skills to get to extended landmarks as a blocker in space, outstanding at figuring out diverse games up front, and using leverage to stand in there against much bigger rushers. Cam Jorgens of the Eagles, another guy who definitely stands out with his mobility at the pivots, being able to take on pulling duties and cover bodies on the second level. Not someone that'd leave on an island too much in protection maybe, but he can mirror guys as well as anybody. And finally, I went with Zach Frazier of the Pittsburgh Steelers. A rookie who has exceeded all expectations that maybe even I had for him as a fringe first round prospect personally. Already came in with a lot of skills that he'd wish for some young guys that he would develop eventually, without any clear weakness I'd say to his game, 4th at his position, PFF grade by the way. Some honorable mentions here: Eric McCoy and Drew Dahlman for the 2 division foes in the Saints and Falcons respectively. Simply haven't played enough at 6 games each, but have performed at the level that would qualify them. Sticking with the NFC South and Tampa Bay and Graham Barton, the rookie's exceptional play, along with offensive coordinator Liam Cohen has done, has been huge in transforming the Bucs' run game. And Hjalte Froholt, someone maybe you've never heard of, and unsung here for the Cardinals, especially this season, just getting the job done with whatever they've asked of him. That has us moving on to the defense, however, now, and we're going to kick things off with the defensive ends, where the first name up here is Myles Garrett. Made a video about where I contrasted him and TJ Watt in the ways they win about a month ago, if you want more detailed analysis, but an absolute freak in terms of power, length and flexibility for that frame, leads the NFL with 70 total pressures, and just 2 of the top marking tackles for loss. Trey Hendrickson, who is first here, as the only actual bright spot for an otherwise horrid Bengals defense, leads the NFL with 12.5 sacks, and also second in pressures, so he's in no way lucking into that production, but rather coming up big when allowed to rush the passer in big spots at the end of games. Plus he's knocked on 5 passes. Micah Parsons for the Cowboys missed 4 games, but is still one of only 7 defenders in the whole league with at least 60 pressures, and he constantly receives extra attention because he's so damn fast with the ball and has continued to evolve in the way he uses his hands and converts it into power, tied with Garrett for the league's top pass rush productivity. Nick Bosa is the next name they want to bring up here for the 49ers, just short of that mark I just mentioned with pressures, has earned a PFF grade of just over 90, regularly condensing the edge and forcing quarterbacks to move off the spots from those wide alignments if he doesn't actually log a sack. He also tipped an interception to himself early in the year where he read a screen pass against Arizona. Max Crosby of the Raiders, a guy who barely ever leaves the field, 13 snaps played among defensive linemen, despite being out for a couple of weeks. Maybe only 7.5 sacks, but he does affect the pocket regularly. His 17 tackles for loss are just one of the top mark in the league, and he's batted down 5 passes. The last one is Gregory Rousseau for the Bills. Basically has the exact same totals as Max, but he's been actually more efficient at rushing the passer, with 59 pressures on just over 400 opportunities, able to set the edge effectively with a combination of length and strength, and he continues to get better, especially as a pass rusher. Honorable mentions: the 2 Texans guys in the top row, of course, in Danielle Hunter and Will Anderson Jr., who are up there for the most sacks in the league for a Texans defense that's pressured the opposing passer and got enough to field in 3rd downs, as well as any team. Tough to separate those. And Josh Hines-Allen still getting it done for the Jags, even if it's not quite at the level as last year when he was earning the big contract. We'll go to outside linebackers here next, because it makes more sense to categorize these guys as edge defenders anyway. Starting with TJ Watt, I might not agree with him being the overwhelming favorite for Defensive Player of the Year, because he's not as productive at putting heat on quarterbacks than some other guys, but you can't argue with the big playability, being tied for a league lead with 6 fumbles forced, 11.5 sacks, 18 tackles for loss. He's a menace to deal with. Jonathan Grenard, as the one guy for the Vikings who you don't need a scheme of production for. I questioned at the time if the Texans were really upgrading with the addition of Danielle Hunter, and Grenard has been playing pissed off that they moved on from him, putting on a show against his former team early in the year, but he's also tied for 3rd in total pressures for the full year. Nick Bonita for the Broncos made a massive jump this season, now being tied for 3rd with 11.5 sacks on the year, 14 TFLs, one of only 2 defensive player overall, with multiple touchdowns scored, including that crazy one last week on the throwback pass by the Colts. Not quite up to in total pressures, but he's also outside the top 15 rush opportunities, so his production could be even better if he wasn't rotated out so much on all downs. Jared Verse for the Rams, have to scroll down a little bit for, who outside of the Buffalo game has been easily the best rookie edge rusher in the league. Only has 4.5 sacks in the year, but he's also 15 total pressures, as someone who constantly crashes in one side of the pocket, along with a couple of fumbles forced. Khalil Mack for the Chargers is still going strong, as one of the league's best edge setters in the run game, and power rushers at that spot. Only Myles Garrett and TJ Watt have earned higher grades from PFF, among guys with 300 plus snaps on the season at the position. And the last one was really tough, and the last one was really tough, and the last one was really tough, but I went with Brian Burns, who has really heated up for a Giants defense that has continued to crumble. 54 total pressures, 13 TFLs, 8 passes deflected. He can win the corner with speed and bend, but he also brings a ton of effort to get there late in the rep. Honorable mentions, the rest of that first row really, with Will McDonald, Andrew Van Ginkel, and Calvin Noy, all of the production to back it up, even though they get it done in different ways. With Van Ginkel being an absolute maniac for Brian Flores, who he can deploy in different ways. Frankie Louvu as the one name here, who primarily actually plays off the ball, but can walk down and play on the edge, defend the run from different alignments, and affect throwing lanes in coverage. Just a complete player. Jonathan Cooper, the other guy for Denver, but plays almost all the snaps and is tied for the most defensive stops in the league at that position. Bowie Mafe, the most productive guy among a young group of outside linebackers in Seattle, even if you see him being second here in sacks, having taken another step in year 3. And Yaya Diaby for the Bucks, you can see here only 2 sacks in his second season, but he's actually 12 in total pressures and routine effects plays with his disruptive style. Moving on to the interior now, where at defensive tackle, we start with Dexter Lawrence of the Giants. I fear it might not be quite enough to get him onto an All-Pro team because he was lost for the season with an injury a couple of weeks ago, but it shall not be forgotten what an absolute force big Dex was at his position for an otherwise struggling Giants D. His pressure numbers in relation to how often he was double teams at the nose are absolutely mind-boggling, and that's despite all the dirty work he was asked to deal with handling forehands in the run game as well. Chris Jones of the Chiefs, he's tied for third among all defenders with 66 total pressures, can line up anywhere along the front and whoop ass, understanding the weak spots in his opponents and really attacking those. Plus he's become much more willing to just hold his ground against the run than early in his career. Cam Hayward at the top here, who is actually tied with Timmy T.J. Watt for the second most defensive stops among defensive linemen / outside backers. Someone who just continues to fight off blocks to get to the ball and will put guards into the lap of the quarterback whenever he gets the chance to. Leonard Big Cat Williams had that amazing 91-yard pick 6 against the Jets a few weeks ago, but has been a force along Seattle's resurging front all year. 7 sacks, 12 TFLs, 3 passes broken up, and it's just a disruptive presence with his combination of size, power, and quicks. Jalen Carter of the Eagles, turning into one of the premier defenders in all of football, with a lot of attention going his way when you look at the blocking schemes against Philly. 7th among interior D linemen in total pressures, tied for first in TFLs, and 5 passes swatted down the line. And the last one was tough, but I had to go with Zach Allen here, since he's second to only Chris Jones with 61 total pressures, also tied for first with 12 TFLs, was credited with a safety earlier this year. He just does it on a heavy snap count, but that's in service of an elite Broncos defense, so I can overlook that maybe if he's not quite as efficient as some other guys. The honorable mentions here, which is in the top row and I felt really bad about leaving him off, that's Kobe Turner of the Rams, leads all defensive linemen with 39 defensive stops, where it's kind of swapped to last year, where the tape now is almost more impressive than the production, but just not quite as good when offenses go at him and move him vertically to some degree on double teams. Vita Vea on the other hand, who is a rock in the middle of the Bucs defense with wheels attached to it when you watch him pursue the football. Aleem McNeil has been one of the elite pass rushers on the interior for Detroit, who has molded his game as an oversized free technique after doing more dirty work in the A-gaps early in his career, now unfortunately also on injury reserve. At all for the Bills, and that guy much better than the sack tally would indicate. I think he's all the way down here with 2. Just at an IDL best, 10 pressures in the Detroit matchup. Also Digizua for the Cowboys, 13 total QB pressures among the tackles, although certainly not as strong against the run. Milton Williams of the Eagles, who leads his position pass rush productivity as a heavy rotation guy for Philly next to Jalen Carter. And really both Tennessee guys, always Jeffrey Simmons as a badass in the middle, but also now rookie Devondre Sweat, especially following the Hallett real fumble return, where he looked like a running back with like 150 extra pounds after all the dirty work he's been able to do throughout the season, but also much more disruptive in terms of the run stuffs at that massive frame. Which I have to check now if the next position up here is the inside linebackers. That's where we're going to go. And of course we're going to start further down with Fred Warner of the San Francisco 49ers, omnipresent in coverage with the way he can affect multiple routes and mess with the eyes of quarterbacks, screen killer, speed to not lose the edge on running backs, but also so good at navigating around trash and getting to the ball. The only off-ball linebacker with a PFF grade above 90 actually now. Zach Bond of the Eagles, he's going to be all the way up here, having a massive breakout year now in his role for Philly, after being treated as this hybrid linebacker with no defined role by the Saints after they drafted him. Has 10 more defensive stops than any other player in the league, been highly effective whether you rush him or drop into coverage on longer downs. Dan Henley of the Chargers, he's going to be next. Legit bolt of lightning in the middle of the Chargers D, who I also talked about extensively as part of my video on Players Under the Radar a couple of weeks ago, for how he's made that unit feel like, because he doesn't just get to spots that he's needed, but he arrives there with some purpose and can be a versatile piece in the pressure packers up front. Quincy Williams of the Jets, he's going to be down here, along with Will McDonald, and to some degree his brother Quinnen, along with his brother Quinnen to some degree, and Will McDonald, the guys who will regularly flash on tape. Top 10 total stops, 2 sacks, 2 PBUs, 3 fumbles forced, a couple recovered. He's just a ball magnet with incredible hitting power. Ernest Jones now with the Seahawks. Not nearly as involved as a blitz on passing downs this season, but he's been a defined presence in coverage for both the Titans and the Seahawks once they meet that trade. Just outside the top 10 defensive stops, despite his tackle rate barely above 6%. And then finally, I'm going to go with Patrick Queen, now in the Steelers, after making a move over from Baltimore. I think his range and ability to raise angles has been a big addition for Pittsburgh, who already had a big time thump in Landon Roberts, who I'm happy to bring up his name here, but Queen has cleaned up a lot of stuff, and he's broken up 5 passes as a good measure. Not a position where a ton of guys stick out, but I'm going to mention Caden Ellis of the Falcons, who leads all off-ball linebackers with 34 QB pressures on just about 3 times as many pass rush snaps, so insanely efficient on those. Bobby Okereke of the Giants has had another really good season for Big Blue. Zaire Franklin's former teammate has 50 total stops and a miss rate below 10%, so I want to bring him up here. Although early in the season I didn't love what he was showing. And then Cecil Shire, now with the Texans, might have had one of the dirtiest hits you're ever going to see in knocking out Trevor Lawrence, and maybe kind of the dig to be honest, but his presence in the middle of Houston's defense has been really felt. Next up we've got cornerbacks, and of course at the top here, you're going to have Patrick Tane, kind of a tier of his own as the last remaining shutdown corner in the league. The tape and the numbers agree. Teams largely avoid him because he's taking out the opposing number 1 receiver, but when he is targeted, just 4.5 yards per on those, has 4 picks, of which he took 1 back to the length of the field for a touchdown, 0 missed tackles. He's just elite. Derek Stingley Jr. of the Texans, actually not right in line for Tane in terms of yards per target, and that's just 1 more touchdown allowed, so 3 total, compared to his 5 picks, where he has the best ball skills at the position, whether it's fetting off routes to make plays on the ball, or it's putting legit 50-50 situations where he emerges victorious. And as the Texans have become more of a man-heavy unit, some of the glue-like reps he just had against Tyreek Hill this past week were teach-tape stuff. Christian Gonzalez for the Patriots, I'd say in the tier of Stingley as young guys who have shutdown potential and is deployed against the opposing team's X-receiver at a high rate. Maybe doesn't have quite the same type of ability to play the ball in the air, but times up its arrival for knockdowns incredibly well, and has a scoop and score to add to his 2 picks. Then we've got Trent McDuffie for the Chiefs, who's down with just 1 interception, can play inside and out at an extremely high level, doesn't have the takeaways to show for it necessarily, but he can glove up guys who present challenges with the physicality for most opponents. He's tremendous at discouraging quarterbacks in zone coverage, and he's one of the league's best edge setters when put at the nickel. Then I want to talk about Quinion Mitchell here real quick, who actually doesn't have an interception yet, and his one real chance was negated by his own teammate carrying over for a ball up for grabs. But having a tremendous rookie season for the Eagles, with only 1 touchdown allowed and basically nothing after the catch, his addition has been monumental for Phil's defensive turnarounds under Vic Fangio, especially with how he can take away vertical routes. And finally, I'm gonna go with Christian Benford of the Bills, who's up here a little bit further with 1 interception. One of the game's best at squeezing routes and zone assignments, but as the Bills have called more man or later downs, he's been really good at hanging in the hip pocket of opposing receivers. Top 10 corner in the league according to PFF's database, and I agree with that. Some honorable mentions here: Jalen Johnson for Chicago, still been really good at the isolated guy on the backside of formations for the Bears, while the rest of the defense has dropped down. Devon Witherspoon of the Seahawks, who can affect offenses in so many ways, whether it's blitzing off the corner, crowding slot receivers at the line, or effective multiple routes in zone. Denzel Ward's the one guy of the Cleveland corner trio to maintain his level of play despite taking on tougher assignments regularly. Marlon Humphrey of the Ravens, a guy who gets penalized a lot but has 5 picks to his name, is a very reliable tackler. And then Byron Murphy, actually just ahead of Humphrey in interceptions, and also has that inside out versatility in a diverse Brian Flores defense, where he's asked to take on a lot of assignments. Again, as you'll see in a second, the strong and free safety labels are dumb, but I'll entertain it here. Just running through these a little bit quicker, we're going to start with Kyle Hamilton, Swiss Army knife for Baltimore, who has been asked to play deep a lot more due to the drop-off at the safety spot otherwise. Been outstanding outside of 1 gut-wrenching drop at the end of the first match with the Browns, because of the challenges he creates for opponents, with his length, the ability to play physical and stop plays before they can really even get going. Derwin James of the Chargers, the original Kyle Hamilton I was always call him, has been playing with so much more conviction and coverage I feel like this season. Outstanding tackler, completes from a variety of alignments, a matchup with bigger bodies. Then you've got Budda Baker of the Cardinals. So much fun to watch him add late to the box, almost call a run blitz for himself to blow up plays. There are more misses than you'd like to see in terms of a tackler, but he's also been a highly effective rusher when you've brought him from slot or depth. Brian Branch of the Detroit Lions has taken another step as more of a deep safety than Detroit's primary nickel last year. Really a clue for the Lions D in coverage to make all the match principles work, but equally strong coming down the alley versus the run. Julian Love for the Seahawks, he's up here, a guy who constantly finds himself around the football for Seattle, always on the field for them, takes great angles to the ball, understands his role in coverage extremely well, and when he can come off his assignments, rarely misses tackles. He's been huge for the turnaround. Another member of the Broncos secondary, Brandon Jones, deserves a shout out here at this point. And so does the Jags' Andre Cisco, as one of the very few guys that has really performed well as part of a struggling unit. But I'll go with Jones here based on how well he's done at gluing that group together on the back end. And then, as they call it, the free safeties. Let's go with Xavier McKinney as the first guy up here, tied for the league lead with 7 interceptions, as someone who just owns the middle of the field, been really dependable at making tackles in space and getting his defense off the field in big spots. Kirby Joseph from the Lions in its division is with him at the top in terms of picks, but also PFF's number 1 overall safety for how well he's performed as a tackler and the ball market and coverage, being asked to play deep a lot. Then Jesse Bates for the Falcons, a top 10 safety in both coverage and run defense grade according to PFF. Not the same type of ball production as last year with the Atlanta defense that has really struggled to generate pressure, but less than 200 yards in coverage charge on him. Javon Holland, I think, doesn't have an interception quite yet for the Dolphins, who's going to be down here. I'm going to put him up there for his presence in the back 7, where he's dropped down late and cut off crossers, who has to rotate to the high post as part of a very diverse coverage unit, and the new defensive coordinator Anthony Weaver, even though once again the stats will indicate that. Same is kind of true for Jimmy Ward of the Texans. He actually does have 2 interceptions, but also PFF grades above 75 in run defense and coverage. Has missed some time, but he's been an outstanding tackler with well over 100 snaps logged in the slot, the box, and deep, being a huge key for the Texans D. And finally, Antoine Winfield Jr. Once again, no picks, just 3 PBUs, but also has a fumble return for a long touchdown. Is put in a lot of tough spots as the last line of defense when the Bucs bring pressure, and one of the best blitzers from depth you're going to find. Now, let's talk a little bit about special teams, and please stick with me for that so we can give attention to these guys well that they deserve, but I'm going to make it quick here. First with the kickers, Chris Boswell for the Steelers, Mr. Automatic. I feel like with him, not the way that did, with his division rival and Justin Tucker for years before his recent drop-off, has made 5 more field goals than any other kicker in the league, winning multiple games where the team didn't even score a touchdown, and he's been perfect on PATs. Then Brandon Aubrey for the Cowboys, the guy today with the best range, maybe ever when it's all said and done. His percentage is a little down because of how many long kicks he attempts, since he does have a season best 65-yarder to his name, but also no missed extra points. Cameron Dicker for the Chargers, second best field goal make rate in the league, with 1 kick of 40 plus and 1 of 50 plus missed. He just has 3 missed PATs, with a couple of those at least partially being blocked, I believe. Nick Folk, as we scroll down a little bit here, the only guy ahead of Dicker with a 95.5% make rate on 3-pointers, 21 of 22, also 100% on extra points. While how consistent he's been, despite what otherwise has been the worst special teams units in the league according to DVOA. Will Lutz for the Broncos, as we scroll back up here, only 1 of his 3 misses came below 50 yards, perfect on his 35 extra points, booms those balls on kickoffs with help from the altitude at mile high. And then Chase McLaughlin for the Tampa Bay Bucks, his only 2 missed field goals being from 50 plus, lots of big kicks at the end of half the regulation, the only blemishes being 1 PAT shanked and 1 blocked in return for 2. In Tampa, it's also the big-legged punt on kickoff duty, so you can knock him down for that if you like. I won't act like I'm grinding tape on long snappers or could really provide any analysis here, so let's move on to the punters. Tommy Townsend for the Texans, been a huge factor for Houston coming out on top in games where they've relied on the defense and winning field position battles, tied for 30 net yards per punt, despite a touchback rate of just 2.6%, just over 100 return yards against the Texans all season long. Logan Cook of the Jags, second in the category of overall yardage per punt, as well as punt percentage inside the 20, and about double of Townsend's touchbacks, as one of the very few constants in Jacksonville. Jack Fox of the Detroit Lions, we have to scroll down a little bit here. The king in net yards per punt at 46.1, just 3 touchbacks compared to 29 punts ending inside the opposing 20. He's a weapon for Detroit when they don't go for it and just want to pin the other team deep. Matt Araiza for the Chiefs, who replaced Townsend in Kansas City, and they haven't really skipped a beat with the guy who was called the punt god in college, but had to go through some trying times with what supposedly turned out to be false claims. A little further down in the main categories, but length to hang time is excellent with him. Michael Dixon of the Seattle Seahawks, and one of the best technicians at the position, who can really change up how he challenges returners, tied for 8th in net yards per punt, and just outside the top 10 also in kickoffs, which he handles all of those for Seattle. And finally, Blake Gillikin of the Arizona Cardinals, tied with Townsend for 3rd in overall yardage per punt. As mentioned at the top, only 1 touchback compared to 19 kicks down inside the 20. He's been outstanding. Moving on now to return specialists, and that's an easy one. Kevontae Turpin leads the NFL in total return yardage at just under 1,400. The only guy of touchdowns, taking back punts and kickoffs each, kind of in a tier of his own right now, while the next two are kind of grouped together for me, and that's Darius Davis of the Chargers, who ranks 3rd in both punt and kick return average among guys with double-digit attempts in those categories, and Marvin Mims of the Broncos, who also hasn't reached the end zone quite yet, but regularly it feels like he's just one missed tackle away from going to the house, leads the NFL with over 15 yards per punt return, with only a handful of tries on kickoffs, which is why he's down here, because there's for some reason they're listed by kickoff returns. Next I was going to go with DeAndre Carter, who doesn't quite crack 10 yards on punts, but 32 on kickoffs, and generally very reliable, not dancing around a whole lot. For some reason he's not listed here for Chicago, so just consider him one of my votes. Next up I'm going to go with Emmitt Smith-Marsette, kind of the opposite, well try to shake guys in space and make them look silly, but can also lose yardage as a returner. He's still a definite threat though. And the last one is Amir Abdullah of the Raiders, very limited work on punts, but basically 33 yards on kickoffs. That'll get you a spot on here. And lastly, let's talk about special teams here real quick. I'm gonna search a little bit here for Brandon School of the Patriots. Just this crazy man with long hair who can line up anywhere and tell to run full speed down the field on kick coverage, and will find himself around the ball for the Pats. Jeremy Reeves represents a couple of Washington guys here, as Neil and Nick Bellore are literally 1st and 2nd respectively in special teams tackles. JT Gray of the Saints has been one of the best gunners in the league for several years now, and been kept on the roster in New Orleans for 7 years, despite playing just 150 defensive snaps in his career. Then I'm going to go with Luke Gifford as one of the 2 real bright spots on an otherwise terrible Tennessee special teams group, as someone just constantly is involved on stops in the return game. Miles Killebrew of the Pittsburgh Steelers, another guy who's just been almost a pure special teamer since his 3rd of 9 seasons in the NFL across 2 teams now. 4-face guy, one of the best personal protector on punts, and also up there near the top in terms of stops created. Then finally we're going to go with Nick Niemann of the Chargers, tied with Killebrew for 7th in total special teams tackles, very reliable at coming to bounds and making stops on punt teams in particular, for a really good group in that regard with the Chargers, which now we can post our ballot. And that brings us to the end of this video. Thank you so much for watching, especially if you hung around in there for special teams. You're real sick here and I love you for it. If you enjoyed this rather simple video from my standards, please hit that like button and consider subscribing if you're into more X's and O's breakdowns, which you can find all over my channel. Whether you agree or disagree with my assessments, let me know in the comments down below, along with any other topics you'd like me to cover. For all my written content, which I typically alternate between an article and video every week, you can head over to my site hello@footballtalk.com or follow me on social media. Links for all of that are down below in the description. For now, Merry Christmas to all of you, and I can't wait to hear from you guys in the new year. So until then, see you later. Peace!